The time has finally come for the XL Azumarill PvP IV deep dive. I know a lot of you guys have been waiting on this one, but if you guys aren't familiar with the PvP IV deep dive series, basically I'm going to let you know what the important stat checks are for Azumarill, and I'm going to let you know what IVs correlate with those stat checks so you can build the best possible Azumarill you can for Great League PvP. And if you've already built a really good Azumarill, this can kind of highlight the potential advantages and disadvantages that your Azumarill can have based off of its stats. I'd say overall, Azumarill is looking pretty forgiving compared to most other Pokemon I've done PvP IV deep dives on, so that's pretty great. And to help validate this information even further, I even do have some insight from KiengIV and ThoTechtical themselves, two master level players that brought Azumarill to their regional championships. So let's get into it. And just as a heads up, if you're not familiar with my PvP IV Deep Dive series, I will be talking about the hidden true stats of a Pokemon. You can't see these stats in-app aside from the HP, but you can see them if you use a stat checking app, such as PokeGenie or KiengIV. You can also plug in the stats into pvpoke.com, the Go Stadium Rank Checker, pvpivs.com. But if you don't want to hassle yourself with all that, I do have PvP IV tables curated to highlight what the good IVs are for you. Also, if you want to reference any of this information in a text-based format, linked in the description, I have my article, the XL Azumarill PvP IV Deep Dive, up on GamePress, because it can be pretty, jarring to go through a video and try to find all the numbers again. So yeah, link in the description to the article. And the article also has the links to the PvP IV tables as well, so you may have to go there anyways, kids. So starting out with the basics on XL Azumarill's IVs, as far as stat checks are concerned, nothing really seems to be all that important. In this guide, I'm going to highlight, defense breakpoints and attack breakpoints that could be useful to get, and if they appeal to you, you can pursue them. But if you happen to miss them, it really doesn't seem to be that big of a deal for Azumarill as long as you have like generally good bulk to begin with. I'd say getting a slight energy advantage is probably much more impactful for Azumarill and its matchups than getting an attack or defense breakpoint are, for the most part. So to that end, what's the bulk ratio? Well, what I found is that if your Azumarill has at least a 135.78 defense stat and at least a 192 HP stat, that's kind of like the standard good general bulk to have on your Azumarill. Now, of course, you may have lower defense or higher defense and lower HP or higher HP, right? And what I found is that the defense and the HP, since there is no like hard defense breakpoint, they can make up for each other at about a 1-to-2 ratio. So every 1 defense change, you'd want to have a 2 HP change. So if you had like a 136.78 defense stat, then you could get away with having 190 HP, and if you had like a 134.78 defense stat, then you could make up for that by having 194 HP. Now, this rule is kind of just like a generalization. It's not set in stone. I did try to do some stress testing on it, and there could be some wiggle room to go out of the lines. Like if you got lower bulk than that bulk standard, it might not be, that big of a deal. But this is what I found to be like the just general good, kind of standard to hold on to. And if you just happen to miss it by a hair, probably not that big of a deal. When it comes to the stats and breakpoints specifically, I think it's kind of best to start out with the attack breakpoints, because the attack breakpoints can be a little bit more proof in the pudding and do appear to be a little bit more relevant for Azumarill than what the defense breakpoints end up being, because the defense, you need to have such great defense to even begin to hit them. So the first attack weight that we can look at is 91.7 for Talonflame. It allows you to secure the 0-0 shield situation and gives you more like fast move farming potential, right? And just about every single Azumarill should be able to meet this attack breakpoint. It is like the slightest of slight attack weights. What I find to be a little bit hilarious though is that the rank 1 Azumarill does in fact miss out on this attack breakpoint though, so man, the rank 1 can never catch a break with these deep dives, right? Of course, a Talonflame could have lower defense than what the rank 1 Talonflame has, and then in that case the rank 1 Azumarill and basically every single Azumarill will get that attack breakpoint. But if there's ever a reason to not build the rank 1, well, here's one reason, right? Now for a slightly higher attack breakpoint, we do have a Cofagrigus defense breakpoint. And I also talked about this in my Cofagrigus PvP IV deep dive, where you do want to focus on having like a higher defense or like a slightly defense weighted Cofagrigus just to avoid this, attack breakpoint from Azumarill. And yeah, well, if Cofagrigus is trying to dodge it, well then apparently, obviously having slightly higher attack, that could be helpful, right? So the breakpoint starts at 91.9 to attack, and then like the highest attack I feel Azumarill can reasonably pursue before it starts to lose too much bulk would be 93.03 attack. And the 93.03 accounts for like most slight defense weight Cofagrigus. Like for a Cofagrigus to avoid like the 93.03 attack, like it's gonna have to dip even harder into the defense stat. But even hitting that high of an attack stat, like you're gonna find that like I think maybe just one of the splits in the PvP IV table will hit this high of attack. So like Cofagrigus just has to be mindful of its defense, and then if they're not so mindful of their defense, they built to rank 1, then you can get this attack breakpoint. So what does this breakpoint even do? Well, you can now take the 2-2 shield scenario straight play rough, and you can take it on in the 1-1 shield scenario straight hydro pump, and then it does give you a little bit boosted consistency in other kind of like uneven scenarios as well. If I'm not mistaken, I think it does allow Azumarill to farm if it has like a shield advantage sometimes too. So could be really useful for that matchup. Useful enough to just be aware of, a slight attack weight on your Azumarill. Then when it comes to these ladder attack weights, I feel like it's too easy for the Pokemon to like outstep the attack range. So they're good to be like mindful of just in case you are up against a Pokemon that's thrifting on their defense. Then if you do have that slight attack weight, you could, more potential to hit it there. But definitely nothing to, focus on too much. The first one is going to be Lickitung with a 92.15 to 92.96 attack weight, giving you more potential in the 1-0 shield scenario and the 2-1 shield scenario. So you're having a shield advantage, having a better time against the Lickitung. The 92.15 is based on a raid IV weight Lickitung. So like the rank 1 has like a 8 attack stat or something like that. So a lot of people might not have that. They might have a raid weighted one that could be more consistent of an opponent to go against. 92.15 can possibly get that, and that makes 92.15, also combined with the Cofagrigus numbers to be kind of like my standard like minimum attack stat if you are looking for a slight attack weighted Azumarill there. The 92.96 is based on the rank 1 Lickitung, and then just like with Cofagrigus, going for this super high attack stat is a little bit unreasonable for Azumarill. But if you already happen to build an XL Azumarill that has, like a 93 attack stat, then hey, it's good to be aware that you're probably going to get the attack breakpoint on Lickitung. But overall, I'd say the breakpoint helping you in these matchups is, relatively inconsistent, so it's not exactly a priority, just something that's worthwhile to be mindful of. Then when it comes to Skarmory, we got 92.76 attack, which can get you the 1-1 shield scenario with Ice Beam. It can be a little bit IV dependent too, so not exactly proof in the pudding. I think you just have a lot more potential to deal with this if you have a slight attack weight to begin with, and then the Skarmory is like thrifting on defense, so then you can maintain that bulk. Just something to be aware of. And then with Trevenant at 93.09 attack stat, so that's for the rank 1 Trevenant, so already kind of too high for most Azumarill. It does give you 2-1 shield potential, right? So you spend 2 shields, they spend 1 shield, now you have more potential to beat them. But most Trevenant, if you checked out my Trevenant PvP IV deep dive, do want to be defense weighted. Like they want big defense. Like Cofagrigus wants ever so slight defense, Trevenant wants all the defense it can get. So I don't think this is something that Azumarill can consistently ever expect to get against a well-prepared opponent. Then moving on to the defense breakpoints. The defense breakpoints, most of them are kind of crazy high. Like they're beyond the rank 1. They're even more beyond the rank 1, right? And only like a handful of Azumarill can even begin to hit these defense stats. So to that end, like they're worth being mindful of. And if you do happen to have like a really high defense Azumarill, then hey, that can be really cool. But I don't think that they're so good that you'd want to never build a big XL Azumarill until you got a defense weighted one, because the results are fairly inconsistent. So the lowest defense stat to pitch here is going to be the 135.78 defense, which is the minimum for the rank 1 Walrein, so it doesn't get the attack breakpoint on you, so it can't straight earthquake you. Also highlighted in my Walrein PvP IV deep dive there. Of course, there is the attack weighted Walrein though that is trying to get the breakpoint on you, and if you have a 137.28 plus defense stat, then you potentiate like dodging that attack breakpoint from Walrein pretty well. This is going to be based on the highest attack weight that I recommended in that deep dive, so there could be even higher attack Walreins out there, right? But 137.28 defense is already pretty crazy high. So if you're going for this, you're not just doing it for Walrein, you're doing it for the other things in this section as well. But yeah, something to be mindful of if you do happen to have a really big defense Azumarill to work with. The next weight is going to be for Medicham at 137.64 plus defense. This is based on the rank 1 Medicham, and the rank 1 Medicham actually has like a pretty high attack stat. Like, I think there's only like a small amount of like really high value Medicham that do have a higher attack stat than this. So as far as consistency goes, I think this is somewhat reliable to a degree. I'd feel pretty comfortable with this. But yeah, it gives you more consistency in the 1-1 shield scenario, and it does give you potential to take on Medicham in the 1-2 shield scenario with Play Rough. So yeah, you know, taking less counter damage is taking less counter damage, and Medicham, even though that is a fight that you think that you would win, Psychic hits hard enough, it's fast enough, counter is OP, you know, all is but certain when you're up against a Medicham ever. Like, even if you're a ghost type, it's crazy. Then the next weight is going to be for Shadow Nidoqueen. 138.04 plus defense can allow you to avoid most of their attack breakpoints. Obviously, with Shadow Pokemon, you can't really control what IVs you get, so the propensity for your opponent to have a really big attack weight, you know, is probably higher than it is for most other species in this game. But this is kind of based on the attack weight I was recommending in my Shadow Nidoqueen PvP IV deep dive. So if there is like a ballpark people are shooting for, it's probably going to be for that kind of attack weight, which, you know, in which case having this defense stat could help you out. Now, how much does this really matter for the Nidoqueen matchup? Well, if Nidoqueen hits that breakpoint, the Shadow Nidoqueen, mind you, then it can farm you down in the 0-1 shield scenario. So you spend no shields, they have to spend a shield because you throw Ice Beam, and then from that point, if they have the breakpoint, they can fully farm you down completely before you can reach the next Ice Beam, even if you have a 1 fast move energy lead, which is really huge because they have like more energy than an Earth Power at that point, which is extremely terrifying to have to deal with, right? Where if you have this defense breakpoint, then they don't get that. If they think they got it and they don't, then you reach an Ice Beam, and then they either have to spend a second shield or just lose all of that energy, which is, it's just game flippingly massive. Or if the opponent's smart and they recognize that they don't have the breakpoint, well, then they have to dump energy to KO you, in which case Shadow Nidoqueen is a lot less threatening on the next thing in. And then finally, there's a Drifblim breakpoint at 137.82, which gives you more potential to 1-1 it using Ice Beam. And not that big of a deal. We don't see a lot of Drifblim nowadays, but it's in there. I thought it was worth mentioning at least. But yeah, once again, to reiterate, these attack and defense breakpoints are pretty useful for Azumarill. They're good to be aware of, but it's not the whole story. And when it comes to a lot of these matchups, if you have a little bit more of an energy lead, you know, than what's, you know, simulated here, then that can be much more impactful than having the attack or defense breakpoint to begin with. So it's like, these breakpoints are good to be aware of. They're good to be mindful of, but they're not the end all be all, is what I'm trying to get at. So what IVs like even meet this, right? Well, I got 2 tables linked on GamePress to PvPIVs.com. This particular table is based on the 92.15 attack stat, and then also using the minimum bulk for the bulk range that I talked about earlier in the video, right? So you can see that there's 77 spreads here. Something that's important to be mindful of with these IVs is that there are a good amount of false positives included in here because the defense and HP stat are on a range, and I can only set, you know, minimums on the stats here. So like, how to put it? So it's like, if you got a 133.78 defense stat, you can make up for that by having a 196 HP stat, right? So you got that 133 defense, that's pretty low. Well, if you have like a maximum defense stat, then you could get away with having like a 188 HP stat, right? So when I set this table, I have to use both the 188 HP and the, you know, 133 defense which means that there's going to be stuff in here that falls out of range. If you don't really get what I'm talking about with this, then just focus on the Azumarill IVs that have like 1497 CP or higher, and you'll probably be fine. I wouldn't worry about it. It's just letting you know that it says 77, but the number that fits this range is going to be a little bit lower than 77. Yeah, link to these tables on GamePress there, which is linked in the description. Now, understandably, this whole breakpoint situation does sound a little bit vague. Like, I'm saying that they like matter, but they don't matter that much. There's this bulk range. What's that all about, right? So to help validate this information a little bit more, I reached out to KiengIV and ThoTechtical just to see if there was something that I was overlooking or not emphasizing enough in what I saw. So yeah, I reached out to them because, you know, I got a pretty good relationship with them. They both brought Azumarill to the regional championships, and they're both pretty aware of how IVs influence their matchups as well. So I figured if there was something that I was missing, they're probably seeing it, right? So when I talked to King about it, King said that he didn't really notice any significant breakpoints or bulk points for his Azumarill options. He just built the best looking one that he had, which, you know, parallels this information here. King actually shared with me his Azumarill IVs. He was using the 1-11-14, which is the rank 23 Azumarill. Looking at the stats specifically on this, you'll see that it does have a 92.6 attack stat, which is pretty good for the Cofagrigus. And then as far as like high bulk Azumarills are concerned, your chances of getting CMP there are quite high as well. And it is just high enough to maybe hopefully get a Lickitung breakpoint. All of which not even that big of a deal, because are you going to see Cofagrigus that much? You know, and it doesn't really help out the Lickitung matchup that much either, so focusing on bulk is a little bit more important, but having that slight attack weight is pretty useful too. When it comes to his bulk, he has 133.7 defense and 196 HP, which ironically enough syncs up with the 1-to-2 defense HP ratio that we talked about earlier on. So he's got 2 less defense than the industry standard, but he makes up for that by having the 4 higher HP. So 2 less defense made up for 4 more HP. It's a 1-to-2 ratio, so it ends up fitting pretty nicely. It fits, and dude took first place, so clearly fits. Been talking to Tho about this topic here. Yeah, once again, same situation. He didn't really seem to notice any particular stats mattering in a really big way for Azumarill. He just wanted to make sure that you had really good bulk. However, he did notice that he felt that the Cofagrigus attack breakpoint could be really impactful should you ever run into a Cofagrigus, and then you also get CMP on top of it. So having a bit of an attack weight could go a long way, right? So at the end of the day, you know, maybe there's something that all three of us are missing, but it just seems to be like big bulk Azumarill, slight attack weight seems to be the way to go. So that wraps it up for the XL Azumarill PvP IV deep dive. If you got any questions on this content, of course, comment below, let me know what's up, and I'll be happy to help you out. And if you enjoyed this kind of content, you want to see more like it, well, make sure to subscribe to SwagTips. SwagTips. I'd also like to give a special shout out to these Patreon supporters. If you want to support Swagman on Patreon, link in the description.